Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. US President-elect Donald Trump receives a no-penalty sentence in the hush money case in Manhattan, meaning he will not serve jail time or have to pay any fines. Police impose nighttime curfews in Los Angeles as they warn off looters as wildfires continue to blaze. And British Chancellor Rachel Reeves travels to China for trade talks in an attempt to rescue the UK economy. To our top story, and US President-elect Donald Trump has received a no-penalty sentence on all 34 counts at his hush money case in Manhattan today. The incoming president, who appeared via video link, will avoid jail time, probation, and will not have to pay any fines. Speaking to the judge, Trump called the case a political witch hunt intended to damage his reputation so he would lose the election. We can now join our correspondent who is in New York, Mitch McCann. Mitch, thank you so much for joining us this evening. No jail, no fines, no probation. Is that the outcome we were expecting?
That's right. Good morning from New York. Essentially, it was the outcome we were expecting. Judge Juan Merchan in this case announced last Friday afternoon that he was going to sentence Donald Trump today after many delays in this case after his conviction last year. But he said critically to Donald Trump that I'm not going to impose a jail sentence or a probation or a fine or anything like that. It's going to be an unconditional discharge, and that is what Donald Trump received today. What does an unconditional discharge mean? Well, essentially, as it sounds, he has been discharged and there is no conditions attached to his sentence, meaning he is free to go, although he still has that conviction attached to his name. So in 10 days' time, when Donald Trump walks into the Oval Office after his inauguration, he will still be a convicted felon. It's important to note that he's appealing this case. He's hoping to have that overturned, but that could take many months before we have a decision on that.
Donald Trump was not physically present in court today, but what did he have to say during the proceedings?
Yeah, that's right. Donald Trump was beaming in via a video stream to the court, sitting very close to the camera alongside his defence lawyer, Todd Blanche, who, it's important to note, is going to be working for him when he's president in the Justice Department in just a couple of weeks' time. But Donald Trump said when it was his turn to speak, this has been a terrible experience. I think it has been a tremendous setback for New York and its court system. As you mentioned at the top, he called it a witch hunt as well, something he has been trying to get across for a very long time. We only have to look back to the trial last year when Donald Trump would walk out in the lunch breaks or at the end of the day saying that it was a witch hunt and it was political interference. We also heard the same argument from his lawyer, Todd Blanche, today, who told the court that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office had passed on this case before, but it wasn't until Donald Trump announced he was running for president again in 2022 that they resurrected this case and tried it in a court. So Donald Trump stuck to his usual script, calling this a witch hunt today, but in the end, really, it has to be said this was a positive scenario in terms of sentencing for Donald Trump, that he really has no jail, probation or fines.
What's the reaction been like in New York, where you are? And have we heard from Stormy Daniels, whose revelation started this whole case?
Well, the first thing to answer is no, we haven't heard from Stormy Daniels, who was integral to this case. She appeared in court last year as well. Nothing posted on her social media, and I think one might assume that Stormy Daniels perhaps is wanting to stay out of the limelight when it comes to Donald Trump after going through that experience for many years, including that trial last year. As for the reaction in New York, it has been a relatively quiet one, mostly because we knew of what the likely outcome was in terms of that unconditional discharge today. Behind me, there were some people earlier, probably a couple of dozen who had their Donald Trump flags here to support the president-elect, but they've all gone home now. So a very quiet and cold day here in New York, most people knowing what the outcome was going to be. And just finally, I will point out that this is really the only case of Donald Trump's that has advanced to trial and now sentencing. At the start of last year, he had 4 trials he was looking at. He only had one in the end. And he has received no meaningful sentence in terms of prison, and he will be president again in a very short time. So a remarkable change in fortune, you would have to say, for Donald Trump.
Mitch McCann in New York, thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated. Chinese President Xi Jinping will send a high-level envoy in his place to Donald Trump's inauguration later this month, according to the Financial Times newspaper. Trump had extended the invitation to Xi last month in an unprecedented move designed to reduce friction between the countries at the start of the new U.S. administration. Laura Westbrook has this report.
It was reported last month that shortly after winning the U.S. presidential election, Donald Trump extended this unusual invitation to Chinese President Xi Jinping to attend his inauguration on January the 20th. Some analysts saw it as an olive branch. Others called it political theater. And that's because no Chinese leader has ever attended a U.S. presidential inauguration. In fact, no foreign leaders have attended one in more than a century. It is common, though, for foreign dignitaries and diplomats to attend, and this is something that Beijing has also adopted. Typically, it is the Chinese ambassador in Washington. Now, according to the report by the Financial Times, Beijing told Trump's team that the high-level official would attend the inauguration instead of President Xi Jinping and would also hold talks with Trump's team. The official could be Han Zheng. He's a vice president who sometimes stands in for President Xi in ceremonial roles. Another option is Foreign Minister Wang Yi. The report also said that some Trump advisors wanted Zai Qi, a member of the Politburo's Standing Committee, who is seen as wielding more power in his capacity as Xi's right-hand man. Analysts say that sending a special envoy of stature may be Beijing's way of signaling its intent to start off on a more positive note with the new administration. And this is important because Trump campaigned on a promise to implement 60% tariffs for all goods imported from China. He also vowed to impose an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods unless Beijing does more to stop the flow of illegal drugs, particularly fentanyl. Beijing is also gearing up for increased tensions with Washington, particularly as Trump has appointed several outspoken China critics to key positions. Among them is Senator Marco Rubio to serve as Secretary of State. Some reports indicate this could signal a more confrontational China policy in Trump's second term compared to his first.
Laura Westbrook, thank you very much for that. The wildfires in Los Angeles continue to rage for a fourth day, with at least 10 people killed as a result of the blaze. The LA Fire Department chief says the region is not out of danger yet, as firefighters continue to put out the flames, with strong winds continuing to blast across the area. Police have now imposed a nighttime curfew as they warn off looters. Here's what they've had to say in the last hour.
A curfew order has been established for the Palisades and Eaton fire areas in all mandatory evacuation zones. That will be in effect. It was in effect last night, and it's going to be in effect tonight. We have well over 500 LA County deputies that are assisting continuous with evacuations, traffic control, security patrols, and other humanitarian efforts. They've been actively patrolling evacuated areas and are increasing their presence to deter any burglary or looting activity that may occur. Just to summarize on evacuations for all the fires that we're dealing with, evacuations orders stand at approximately 153,000 residents that are under evacuation orders, and approximately 57,830 structures at risk, and then evacuation warnings, approximately 166,800 residents under both warnings, or I'm sorry, those are just specifically for warnings.
Let's go live to Los Angeles now and speak to our correspondent, Ira Spitzer. Ira, thank you so much for joining me this evening. 10 people are dead. Authorities believe this figure will rise. Give us the latest on the ground and explain why the windy weather has had an impact on the firefighters who are still tackling the blaze.
Well, we've just had more information from authorities here in Los Angeles in the past hour, as we also just heard from the sheriff there. And the two major wildfires here, the Palisades fire, which you can see the smoke from behind me there, as well as the Eaton fire, which is about 60 kilometers to the east of the Palisades fire. Overnight, there was some progress on containing both fires. The Palisades fire is now considered 8% contained. The Eaton fire at 3% contained. Now, while there's still obviously a long way to go, that's a significant improvement from just 24 hours ago when both of those fires continued to rage out of control. Now, you mentioned the wind. That, of course, is a significant issue here. That is the major cause of the fires to start and presents a series of challenges for those trying to battle the fires on the ground and in the air. Aircrafts is a significant part of these firefighting efforts, and those aircraft were not able to deploy in those initial stages because of the high winds. Now, that situation has changed. Now we see lots of helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft up there, but in terms of dropping water onto the fires, high wind still makes it difficult to do that effectively. It also creates difficult conditions for those battling the fires on the ground because the fire spreads more easily, and it's just a more difficult situation. There is a bit of a break from the winds today. However, we do expect those winds to pick up, especially into next week. And again, remember, there are still these huge wildfires burning, so it's much easier now for those fires to spread if we do have more periods of high winds.
Almost 100,000 homes and businesses in Los Angeles are currently without electricity. And as you say there, the conditions, there's been high winds. If you look at the pictures, it almost looks apocalyptic after the fires. How are these people being supported at the moment?
So residents of Los Angeles have numerous challenges, some as serious, of course, as having lost their homes or not knowing where their loved ones are. But then you have this secondary tier of people who may still be in their homes but have lost power. There are hundreds of thousands of power outages. Those are in some cases a result of wind damaging some electrical equipment, but many are also forced shutoffs by the electric company to prevent potentially more dangerous conditions to continue, because down power lines can pose a major problem. So we've heard reports that those people are really not getting any information or any special assistance from the electrical company or anyone else because of just the overall demand for services right now. So a lot of confusion about how long these power shutoffs may go on. Many people also have to boil their drinking water or go buy bottled water if they are in one of these areas that is subject to these evacuation warnings. So not a lot of information necessarily being distributed about what to do and when that power might come back.
Just one quick question, if you can wrap it up for me in just 60 seconds. One of the fires has been investigated as possible arson. What more do we know about this?
So the Kenneth fire exploded near Calabasas last night, and then a few hours later, there were reports of a man actually with a blowtorch in that region, and he was detained by neighbors who eventually called the police, and the police came and arrested that person on suspicion of arson. Now, we've learned that they didn't have probable cause in the end to charge him with arson related to that Kenneth fire. However, he did have some other outstanding warrants, so he is being held for the time being. So not clear yet whether that fire was a result of arson. Not clear yet what started any of these fires, but certainly with the community on edge, a situation like that, very scary.
Ira Spitzer in Los Angeles, please keep safe, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Israeli airstrikes have hit Yemen, targeting a power station in Sana'a, according to Al Mashriya TV station run by the Houthis, who control northern Yemen. Britain and the US have responded with airstrikes after reports of the Houthis targeting shipping areas around Yemen's main oil export terminal. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has recently said Israel was only at the beginning of its campaign against the Houthis. A meeting between Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin will take place. Despite no exact date, the US president-elect confirmed it was being set up, with the Kremlin saying it was open to talks. Trump has promised to end the war in Ukraine as soon as he assumes power on the 20th of January. Social media platform TikTok faces the US Supreme Court today as part of an appeal to overturn a ban on its presence in America. If TikTok loses the appeal, it will be forced to sell to an American company and divest from its Chinese parent ByteDance, or face being blocked in the country. US President Joe Biden had previously backed the ban, citing data privacy concerns, but incoming President Donald Trump has sided with TikTok. Actor Alec Baldwin has filed a legal claim against the lawyers who pursued him for criminal charges following the death of a cinematographer on set. Baldwin, who was the lead and co-producer of Western film Rust, was accused of involuntary manslaughter after pointing a gun at Helena Hutchins. The latest lawsuit claims prosecutors sought to scapegoat the Hollywood star and were blinded by their desire to convict him. 2004 was the world's hottest year on record. The European Climate Service claims the Earth exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius, with emissions such as carbon dioxide being blamed for an increase in temperature. UN Chief Antonio Guterres has described the news as climate breakdown. And the world's most powerful passport has been revealed by the 2025 Henley Passport Index. Singapore has retained the top spot, offering visa-free access to 195 countries. Japan takes the second place, with the United Kingdom falling to fifth position. Now, the British Chancellor in charge of the country's Treasury, Rachel Reeves, is in China today, alongside the Governor of the Bank of England and other senior financial figures, as Britain attempts to form stronger economic ties to Beijing to increase growth. China is the UK's fifth largest trading partner, worth £32 billion in exports in 2024. The trip comes as the pound fell to its lowest level in over a year, with UK borrowing costs hitting their highest for 16 years. Let's go live to London for the latest with our correspondent, Olly Barratt. Olly, thank you so much for joining me. Rachel Reeves has had a bit of a rough week, hasn't she? Bring us up to speed and explain why this trip to China is so integral to the UK economy.
That's right. She has had a rough week, and we'll get to that in a second. But actually, it's very much related that she is in China. The UK government, the new UK Labour government, feels that policy towards China from the outgoing Conservatives was muddled and incoherent at times, and it believes that it can have a much better relationship with China. It can boost trade ties with China, and that could be a significant contributor to the UK economy in terms of economic growth. And economic growth has been a central mission of the new UK Labour government. But that is part of the reason that the UK government is having such a difficult time at the moment. We are, according to the latest data, in a period of basically zero growth at the moment. And as you say, in the last week or so, we have seen UK borrowing costs spiking. We've seen the pound slumping against a series of international currencies. And the opposition Conservatives will tell you that part of the reason for that is the policies of the new Labour government. They say the budget that Rachel Reeves introduced in October has throttled economic growth, has led to companies to put hiring freezes in place because of the extra taxes that she has placed on employers. Now, she would deny that, and Labour say that a lot of the difficulties that is being seen on international borrowing markets at the moment, for example, are to do with international factors. But it is very clear that things are not going the way that the UK Labour government had planned when it got into power. Now, that presents a problem for a number of reasons. One is political. This is a government that said it would boost economic growth, and at the moment economic growth does not seem to be being boosted at all by the policies that we've seen from the Labour government so far. The other is around future plans, because as borrowing costs spike, the UK government is obviously having to spend more on its borrowing, and that calls into question its future spending plans. Now, will Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, have to go for fresh tax hikes to pay for these higher borrowing costs? She says that she's not going to do that, which means that the prospect of spending cuts is being raised as a very real prospect in the months ahead so that she can balance the books. Now, this is a government that's promised there won't be a return to what is called austerity of previous Conservative governments, so that presents a major conundrum for Rachel Reeves. She's being accused of being missing in action by the opposition Conservatives for heading to China. They say she should have cancelled this trip. The government says at a time of economic slowdown, China's exactly where you want to be.
Olly Barratt in London, thank you so much for that reporting. Let's delve into this a little bit more with economist Laurie, who's joining me now. Laurie, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Olly touched on this. The pound has sunk to its lowest level in a year and borrowing costs are soaring. Earlier, the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, said the public should not be worried about this. She kind of suggested global trends that have affected many countries are in the mix here. And this is why the UK is seeing these signs in the economy and they're not an outlier. Do you think she's right in her assessment here?
Yeah, that's right. Labour wheeled out Lisa Nandy. She's not usually somebody that we see talking on economics, but as Olly, your reporter, just mentioned, Rachel Reeves is otherwise engaged in China. Yesterday, she was asked to, there was an urgent parliamentary question on these rising government bond yields, on raising government borrowing rates. She was on a plane or didn't turn up, and we had her deputy. Neither Lisa Nandy nor Rachel Reeves' deputy acquitted themselves all that well. But Lisa Nandy is onto something, that the UK is not the only place where borrowing rates are absolutely soaring. We're seeing something very similar in the US, something similar in France. I think the UK is a little bit different in that rates have come up much more quickly than in these other places. But generally, worldwide, we are seeing rich economies running massive budget deficits. The sort of lending that the borrowing, that they took on during the pandemic to make sure that people who lost their jobs weren't completely cut off from any support. That kind of borrowing has continued despite the fact that most advanced economies, UK slightly exceptional here, are in a bit of a recovery phase. And now when governments borrow, most Western governments spend more than they take in tax. that means they have to borrow. Now, the more that they borrow, the more risky it is that that debt will not be repaid. And so anyone who is lending to these governments demands a higher rate of interest to sort of cover the risk of a reduced chance of repayment.
Laurie, many economists have highlighted that the gilt sell-off that you've mentioned has in effect wiped out Rachel Reeves' fiscal headroom, so it doesn't have much movement. Is Labour budget the real reason behind a lot of this market turmoil we're seeing? Have people lost faith in investing in the UK?
I think that things are probably less dramatic than some of the UK press would have you believe. And to a certain extent, you mentioned the gilt market. Gilts are the financial instrument by which the UK government borrows. So when they want to borrow, they package up that borrowing into a security called a gilt, and then they sell it to people. Who buys this stuff? Investors, pension funds. If you have a pension fund in the UK, you unknowingly are lending to the UK government. So that's what a gilt is. And again, higher borrowing, the higher those gilt yields go. Now, the UK is in a slightly difficult position because, again, gilt yields have run up a lot more quickly. And yes, that does wipe out some of Rachel Reeves' headroom. What that means is that she really has no spare cash if the investment that she has already pledged doesn't make the economy grow any more quickly. And the UK economy does seem to be stagnant at the moment. Now, what that means, interesting question. She has promised that she's not going to come back to to taxpayers for more money. Doesn't have a whole lot of options, though, if growth doesn't materialize. A lot of speculation right now that she may have to scale back some of her spending plans. Back in October, in her first budget, she announced a big expansion in spending, mostly to be spent on the National Health Service, some to go into education. Now, if she is out of, kind of margin, out of a financial cushion, if that's run out because of those higher interest rate costs the government's incurring, what does she do now? It would be very difficult for her to go back and ask people for more taxes. So I think that the feeling is we may see some crimping of that financial investment, that spending that she announced back in October.
In 60 seconds, can we just sum up the US economy? It's smashing expectations with today's job reports. How are the markets reacting to this data over in the US? And give us a little bit of insight in how you think Trump's going to be doing in the next sort of... he comes in the next 10 days. And I think all financial markets are holding their breath at the moment ahead of this.
Absolutely. This is absolutely fascinating. As you mentioned, blockbuster job report. The economy added 256,000 jobs, way more than anybody expected. The upshot is that the Federal Reserve, which has been cutting interest rates, is probably not going to be able to cut interest rates as quickly as they had signaled, say, 6 months ago. It's because a strong jobs market leads to higher wages, which can become inflationary. Now, we know Donald Trump doesn't think a whole lot of the Fed chair. That's the head of the central bank, Jerome Powell. He wants interest rates to come down more quickly than Powell has promised. Really sets up the potential for a showdown between these two men.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one showdown I'm sure we'll be following. Economist Laurie, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really appreciate you. Let's stay with the top business news now. Mercedes-Benz car sales fell in 2024 following a tough year for the auto industry. The German luxury car maker says waning demand in China due to the weakening economy impacted its demand. Despite disappointing sales, Mercedes stock did climb 4% after the results earlier. Oil prices are surging today and are on track for a third straight week of gains. This comes as traders focus on potential supply disruptions from more sanctions on Russia and Iran ahead of President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration this month. Brent crude and WTI are up around 3%. Turning to sports now, and David Moyes is in talks with Everton over a potential return to the club after the sacking of manager Sean Dyche. Well, a deal is not yet done, and Moyes is not the only candidate. Moyes is believed to be the front runner. Negotiations over a contract are set to continue today. And Britain's world lightweight champion says she is in boxing for a good time, not necessarily a long time. Ahead of her fight, Caroline Dubois says she wants to be unbeaten in 3 weight divisions and then retire by 30 years old. Tomorrow she'll mark her 24th birthday by marking a first defence of her WBC title against Canada's Jessica Camera in Sheffield. A reminder of our top stories today. US President-elect Donald Trump receives a no-penalty sentence in the hush money case in Manhattan, meaning he'll not serve jail time or have to pay any fines. Police impose nighttime curfews in Los Angeles as they warn off looters as the wildfires do continue to blaze. And British Chancellor Rachel Reeves travels to China for trade talks in an attempt to rescue the UK economy. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up next, we have special interviews with the former US ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, as well as the Israeli Energy Minister, Eli Cohen. And don't miss the dressing room with Joe Cole, Wayne Bridge and Colton Cole. That's all happening tonight, so you better stay tuned because there's lots to watch. Happy Friday and good night.